Good morning. And today's lesson is about computing limits that deal with radical functions. And when I say radical functions, I'm talking about functions that have square roots or other kinds of roots in them. Now, the easiest thing to do, as I've been telling you, and the first thing you should try to do, is plug in the x value when trying to evaluate the limit. Now, just to let you know, if I plugged in this particular x value, you're going to get 0 over 0. 16 minus 16, square root of 16 minus 4. All right, so that's no good. That's that indeterminate thing. We got to kind of figure things out from there. So because we're dealing with radicals, we can't actually factor this in the traditional sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the conjugate to kind of help us out. Now, if you remember the conjugate, it's going to be the same thing in terms of the radical, but a different sign in between them. So we're going to use the conjugate. Now, this should go back to Algebra 2 about your knowledge of that sort of thing. So in this particular case, the conjugate is going to be the square root of x plus 4. It's the same things, the same terms as where the root is, but a different sign in between them. So the algebra then is you're going to take that function, x minus 16, and you have the square root of x minus 4, and multiply the top and bottom by square root of x plus 4 and square root of x plus 4. Now, the top in this particular case, because there's no radicals in one part of the top, you're just going to write them together like this. You're not actually going to do anything. Don't bother multiplying. It'll become clear why in a moment. The denominator, however, you are going to multiply them. Now, if you remember anything about conjugates, the trick was when you multiply two conjugates together is if you were a student of FOIL, you don't need the OI. You're just going to multiply the first and the last. So the first, square root of x times square root of x, is just x. And the last, minus 4, and the plus 4 is minus 16. Now, the reason why that works with conjugates and only conjugates is because when you multiply the outsides and the insides together, the radical x with the positive 4 and then the negative 4 with the radical x, they end up canceling out. Conjugates always behave that way. Again, I want to stress conjugates. All right, back to the problem at hand. Now, you might be looking at this and saying, oh, check that out. Bang, they cancel each other out. That's so sweet. So this is the same thing as what the original function was. So now we're back to the part where we could just plug in. And when you plug in 16, the square root of 16 plus 4, 8 is your answer. So knowledge of conjugates is what's going to help you with the radical functions. Now, it doesn't matter where the root is, whether it's on top or the bottom with using the conjugates. I don't want you to sit there and say, oh, but the square root's not on the bottom. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Plug in first to see the situation, because if you get a number from just plugging in, then that's your answer. You don't need to do any of this. However, today's exercise is not going to be that easy. You're going to have to do this. So, square root of 25 minus 5 is 0. 25, okay, all right. You're going to get 0 over 0. So now the conjugate in this particular case is the square root of x plus 5. So I'm just going to write that here for my work and then do the multiplication. So first, rad x times rad x is x. Minus 5 times plus 5 is minus 25. Now my denominator. Again, like I said, don't bother actually multiplying those out because, bammo, you're looking for stuff to cancel out. That causes the problem. Remember what I said about 0 over 0? That means something can cancel out, usually, that you can solve the problem with after doing that. Okay, now if this cancels out entirely on top, that does mean that there's a 1 up there. So really we're looking for the limit as x goes to 25, 1 over the square root of x plus 5, and then plug in and you should get 1/10. Alrighty? Okay, all right. What changes here? It's just the algebra. But again, plug in first, make sure, yes, fast forward. You're going to get 0 over 0. Now the conjugate here, a little bit different. You're going to multiply, the square root is going to remain the same. So the square root of x plus 16, change the sign, and then put the 4. Change the sign, then the 4. All right, let's see here. I'll work down here. So the radical x plus 16 times itself is just x plus 16. The minus 4 plus the 4 makes minus 16. And down below there's that x. Then you have that conjugate there. Okay, so now before you go any further, try to cross off and knock off what you can. So first thing is, if you're doing this correctly, the 16 should cross off before the x's. And then you're looking at 1 over square root x plus 16 plus 4. Now let's take the limit of that. Notice I'm writing the limit here. I write it until I do it. It's an operation. I think you get 1/8 from all this. Okay? All right, similar. I just put the radical in the denominator. Just work it out. I'm going to go ahead and just work this out. And yes, in my mind, I did plug in before I did any of this, and it's 0 over 0, so then I move on. And there's your answer. All right, one more example, just to kind of see it all out. Pause the video, I would recommend, and see if you can work this out. I'll just, do it. Okay. And that's for our show today. Please like the button.